Redux. I'm your host, pop culture punk Chris Stiles, joined as always by my co-host with the most, film professor Ian Klink.
How you doing, everybody?
And we have two radical guests on the show tonight. First up, he's one half of the creative genius behind Retro Fiend Radio, makers of the finest canon and martial arts docs on the internet. Dustin Nino is back on the show.
What's going on, guys? What's going on?
And rounding out this righteous crew, he's the video store veteran and cosplay killer. Scott Benson is back on the show.
Hi, guys. What's going on?
Thank you so much for coming on. We are here today because the world lost a man whose work touched us all on a deeply personal and sacredly schlocky way that only Roger Corman could. So for the audience at home, and whoever on the panel wants to go first, I'm guessing it's probably Ian. What does Roger Corman's work mean to you?
Oh, geez, I don't know if I can answer that, Chris.
Well, then give us your gateway drug into the world of Corman and schlock.
Well, I mean, I can be honest. Roger Corman probably came into my life. Like most people, I probably came to Corman with Little Shop of Horrors, but not his version. I mean, since I was about probably 4 years old, my parents had a copy of the Rick Moranis musical. And for those of you that don't know, if you don't know it, it was based on, one of the most fascinating films ever created, which was Roger Corman's Little Shop of Horror, a movie that he did based on a joke. He said, Roger Corman is famous. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but he's famous for doing movies so fast and so cheap. He wanted to know what's the fastest he could make a movie and sell it to the theaters. Well, he did the original Little Shop of Horrors in 2 days and one night's worth of shooting. Well, by chance, it just happened to have a small role with Jack Nicholson. Fast forward, and in the 70s, because it was in public domain, they would play this movie on TV, and these two guys, Alan Menken and Howard Sherman, who went on to do Little Mermaid and The Lion King, other Disney musicals. They thought this would be a great play, so they did it. David Geffen owned the rights, and they made the movie. So long story not short on that is, I watched Little Shop of Horrors, and as the years went by, my love for that movie and my love for film, and starting to kind of see that, I started studying, well, who made this original movie after watching the original and being just amazed by this story. I started studying the work of Roger Corman. And I'll be honest, it really was in film school, where I read his book, how I made 100 movies and never lost a dime. And just reading this biography of this creative genius who never had a dime to make movies. I connected with that. I've never really had a lot of money to make movies, but when you're in that kind of independent world, you do everything you can to make these films, and I connected so well with his approach and his demeanor of that. And reading that book, I mean, it's one of those moments where you remember where you were at because it touched you that much, and me just pausing to kind of think this, just who this guy is and what he's done, and how many legends he's created, and then you find out about the Roger Corman Film School and all these things. It just really, it hit me at a time when I was in film school, just at the right, that I just started eating up everything this man did.
I was gonna say not to I hope I'm not cutting you off, but
no, by all means.
not to relate it to something that would be like so the opposite of Corman, but someone was mentioning Moneyball, the movie Moneyball to me today. And it sort of got me thinking that is kind of Corman in a sense. He, like, I know Sam Markoff was around before,
Yeah,
but like he's sort of like, you know what? I'm not gonna, spend a fortune on home run hitters. Like I'm gonna find guys who can give me base hits. And I'm gonna put out so many base hits that it's gonna make at the end of the year it's gonna add up. And he was kind of right. And that obviously,
Yeah.
like I'm sure Dustin, I'm sure you could see a lineage from Corman to Cannon, and I'm sure that,
Yeah.
Golan and Globus must have crossed paths with him, once or twice at least and
Well,
learned a thing or two.
well, yeah. Here's the thing: Menachem Golan started out. That's what was his first job, was working for Roger Corman.
Oh wow.
Menachem Golan was a driver for him. Started out as a driver for Roger Corman, and then worked his way up as like an assistant and worked with them for a long time before going back to Israel. Menachem Golan has said that there would be no Canon films, there'd be no Menachem Golan without Roger Corman. He learned how to direct movies from Roger Corman, literally.
Wow.
So, so I mean, he learned how to make movies for Canon with that budget. You know, basically, if the first movie is successful, you spend less money on the sequel, and then you make even more money on it.
Yep.
And it's like that was a record, and you can plot on a graph what was doing well and what wasn't. Eventually, Roger Corman would say, well, after like Shark Anaconda, 9, you can see that it starts to fade out. So we don't make more than that.
Yeah.
So
And
I mean,
Corman, I'm sure Corman surely must have gobbled up some Fallout scraps from Canon, like things like Kickboxer sequels and thing. I'm sure that he had a hand in some of those. That some of those surely had to be Concord or New Horizons, right?
sure. Well, yeah. I mean, the whole Blood Fist thing too.
Oh,
Right.
That. I mean, I'm sure he had his hand in it, and um, yeah. I mean, definitely. I personally, I
I
thought,
have the whole series, ladies and gentlemen. All
Ooh,
8.
yeah. I
wow.
mean, it's
How did they
one
not
thing
get
I
tonight? We need the Rise of Skywalker for the Blood Fist franchise at this point.
I've been
The
asking you this
movie,
for years, Chris.
the movie
Years I've
that
been
ties
asking you
them
for
all
a Blood
together.
Fist episode.
I want to do a spin-off, Blood Kick. Um,
Blood kick.
so what about you, Scott? What was your gateway drug into the world of Roger Corman?
So I came at it a little bit differently because I'm a big car guy. And so for me, it was kind of without realizing it was Roger Corman, but it was Death Race 2000,
Oh,
um,
yes.
which early Sylvester Stallone in that movie. And then he also did another cross-country road race movie called Cannonball that also had David Carradine and his brother Robert, and of course all of his usuals: Mary Warnoff, Paul Bartel, and Garrett Graham. And that movie is like on nobody's radar. Like I bring that one up and nobody knows it, but it's interesting because there's one spot.
I do.
Paul Bartel plays a mobster kind of guy that's like holding a bet for Dick Miller, and he's sitting at the table eating KFC with Martin Scorsese and Sylvester Stallone as two of his bodyguards, which is just like the funniest thing to me. But then flash forward a little bit into the 80s, and you're getting into like Battle Beyond the Stars, Spaceship with Boobs, which I think James Cameron Corman kind of helped Cameron get his springboard into film, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah.
And was Galaxy of Terror, I think, was another one of Corman's that was around in the 80s with Robert Englund.
The amount of people that, got their start working for Corman is like astounding. Like, Jack Nicholson, I think Scorsese, even De Niro. Like there's
Francis
just
Ford Coppola, James Cameron, Ron Howard, Joe Dante, John Davidson, who did the Terminator movies. I mean,
James Cameron, Gail Ann Hurd,
Catherine Bigelow. I mean, Sandra Bullock, Sylvester Stallone, as you said. I mean,
Menachem Golan.
Yeah, I mean, like
Canon, Lloyd Kaufman. I know they crossed paths a couple of times early in the runs of things, as did Lloyd and Golan and Globus over at Canon.
Yeah.
That's kind of the Mount Rushmore for me of it all, of schlock, of B movies, of like what I love, what I think American culture kind of really is. I think it's Blood Fist 8. I think it's Caged Heat 3. I think it's Night Eyes 4. Like that's kind of what life was in the 90s if you were a certain age. And
If you say Blood Fist 8, you have to say Blood Fist No Way Out. Blood Fist 8 No Way Out, Chris. We've been over this.
that's
I
true.
gotta mention two of my favorite kind of 80s horror movies, although I'm not sure if Night of the Comet, if Corman was directly involved with that or not, but it had a lot of his people in it. Do you know what I mean? The Roger Corman regulars were
Yeah,
there,
I don't
but
think he produced that one, but yeah, but there's a few
and then
people.
Chopping Mall, it was like he was kind of an uncredited producer, but I think his wife or
Yep.
daughter or something like that
Yeah,
was
Julie
tied in with
Corman.
that one.
Yeah. Yes, she
I
is.
love
Jim
Chopping Mall.
Wynorski.
Yeah,
I mean, Jim
Wynorski.
Wynorski. I
There
mean,
it
you would not have the Wynorski universe without Roger Corman. I mean, really.
Ian's personal hero, Jim Wynorski. Speaking of, you mentioned the regulars being there. I do want to mention the regulars being here tonight in the live chat. And I see some new names as well. I see Stink Ass Cat in there, and thank you so much for the super chat, Stink Ass. I see Caitlin Allman, America's Next Top Model in there. I see Gold's Code. He is preaching for the Raven. He says, "Give it up for the Corman cameos, Godfather 2." So there's some love. Stink Ass Cat loves Dimension 13. And anything with women in it, everything with women in it, he says. Gold's Code also says Corman used to drive the trucks to the set himself and unload them to save on money and budget. I don't know if that's true, but I actually would not be surprised at all.
No, it's very true.
Um,
I mean, literally, anything that Roger Corman could do to cut, to cut corners, to cut the budget, to do whatever it could, so it all ended up on screen. Which, I'll be honest. I mean, it really hit too this week. I've been reading this book, Roger Corman by what is her name? Beverly Gray. She used to work for Roger Corman, and her book has been fascinating because I mean there's tons of documentaries on Roger Corman. There's tons of books about Roger Corman. Hers is the first, though, where she actually worked for Roger Corman, where she kind of is not playing it safe and is being truthful about kind of some of the more
underbelly.
Yeah, more of the difficult side of, it's great that he cut budget on certain things, but it did have an impact on some of the assistants who didn't get paid as much. And the people would, Corman would do which again, it's one of these things like in the same sentence that you say it doesn't sound great, but then if you're a business person, you think, wow, what genius. Is around the Christmas season when things were kind of duller around New Horizons. He would let people go so they would go on unemployment, so he didn't have to pay people, but then hire them back in like February. Little tricks like that. But even Julie Corman, he'd do the same thing to his wife. He'd have her go on unemployment just so that he would save on a few bucks in the office and not turn on all the lights in this room and stuff like that. I mean,
somebody was saying that in the and I haven't confirmed this, I have to go back and rewatch it, but in Rock and Roll High School, there's birds chirping as it's kind of panning across the high school or whatever at the beginning, and somebody like vocally was saying cheap cheap as kind of a dig at Roger Corman as trying to make a bird noise.
That's good.
To that effect. But to me, and that's another Roger Corman classic, to be honest. The Ramones and PJ Souls,
yeah.
Come on.
It wasn't some of Body
Double. It was supposed to
Double?
originally be Disco High. Alan Arkish, the director, actually wrote it as Disco High. And
really?
They changed it last minute. I think it was Joe Dante was talking about this recently on a podcast. Because they could get the Ramones, they decided to go with rock and roll instead of disco. But originally, it was going to be all disco music.
It wasn't not to go too far off topic. Wasn't the part of Blowout supposed to be based, like the movie they were making, supposed to be kind of like an homage to Roger Corman's movies a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a thing like that, or it was like used with trims from an actual Roger Corman movie, maybe that they were overdubbing. I can't remember what it was, but I know there's a connection there.
Well, I think
Body Double. It was a Body Double. The guy in NYPD Blue.
Oh, Dennis Franz.
Dennis Franz, you know, he's supposed to be
Oh,
Roger Corman.
and Blowout. Yeah.
Yeah, he's supposed to, yeah, that's supposed to be kind of based on Roger Corman and
Oh, and Body Double. That's what it is. Okay.
Body Double. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but he played a sound guy for a really shitty film company Travolta did in Blowout too, so that would
Yeah.
also track.
That's
you know what
yeah.
I mean?
That's
As
what I
being a
yeah.
nod.
That's exactly what I was
Um,
thinking. But for me, you know, because it seems like the chat is not going too much other than Gold's Code saying he might produce Lion Fist, an homage to Blood Fist, and you should get in on it, Ian. Also,
Yeah.
Captain Kyle saying Gold's Code, if only Corman did Airborne 2. We can dream of a better world where that happened because
You know, the sad part is he probably thought about doing something related to Airborne because if anything made certain money, Roger Corman did propose ideas. You know, this guy that did the Dirt Bike Kid. You know, like there's
well,
nothing that was sacred.
Oh, and the Skateboard Kid.
And the Skateboard Kid with Dom DeLuise. Yeah, I mean, like
Yeah.
you know, this is Roger Corman world.
I don't think DeLuise was he in the both or just the sequel. I don't know. I need to rewatch
I can't
those.
remember which one.
Those are classics, though. That's American culture right there for you. Dom DeLuise is a talking skateboard in a made-for-cable family movie. Oh, it just sounds so right. It just sounds everything about that.
My realm of knowledge at this point, I have never even heard of that. I'm a Dom DeLuise fan. That's
that's a deep dive.
That's a deep cut.
Kid.
Yeah. That's like talking about Dee Wallace and someone brings up My Mom's a Werewolf. You know, it's which I think is also coincidentally another Corman New Horizons flick. It's funny if you're like not sure who did it, it's probably Corman, or he had his like hands on it at some point.
No, was Corman behind New World Pictures as well? Was that a Corman thing?
The original, his original.
That's my.
Yeah, his original company was called so basically, you know, for a little history lesson on Corman, you know, when he you know, for years he was doing the small movies. I mean, he was doing like, you know, Not of This Earth, Teenage Caveman, you know, I Mobster, you know, these kind of small movies which he would do for American Independent you know, AIP. Which is Sam Markoff and you know they were famous for doing the double bills, you know, and basically for you know $150,000, Roger Corman would direct 2 movies, and they'd send it out in a double bill and make you know $5 million in rentals, you know. But by about the you know I'm going to skip a really important part of his career that I hope we talk about later. But by the 70s, he kind of had it with the company. And so Roger Corman decided to stop directing and he went into his own producing, which he did New World Pictures or New World Concord was what it was called. And, you know, was very successful, did a lot of movies. You know, this is during the Striped Nurses, Caged Heat. This is where
you mean you Concord New Horizons? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it was New World Concord was the company at first, and then in the early 80s Roger Corman sold the company, which eventually became New World Pictures.
And New World actually got into television a little bit at one point too.
That was Roger Corman's part of it, but you know when they sold in the 80s, you know, and became New World Pictures, that's when we started getting like Vamp New World Pictures and you know
them distributing.
Making Contact. Yeah.
So Roger Corman didn't have anything really to do with that part, but it was his start, like his selling of the company that kind of started those, you know, and that's when he then went on to create Concord New Horizons. And that's when like in the 80s and the 90s it was New Horizons. Yeah.
What were you going to say, Dustin? I feel like we cut you off there.
Oh no, you're good. One of the things too, like the distribution company too, you know, New World Cinema. They also their distribution of foreign films, like Shogun Assassin that he did. You know,
Godzilla 1984.
I just remember working at a video store in the 90s and just getting all these screeners, you know, from foreign films and just being like, what the fuck are these, you know? And
yeah,
you know, especially back then because it's so hard to get foreign films, you know, and they would and like there's a movie called that he distributed called Cabeza de Vaca, which means like head of cow, which is like this last guy's name, and it's all. If anybody got out there, I'm sure it's on YouTube or something. It's called Cabeza de Vaca. It's the fucking weirdest fucking movie you've ever seen. I fuck working at the video store, watching this screener, going, "What the fuck is
So-
this? It's like a true story about the Spanish guy who came and had contact with his natives, and it's just a nutty, weird ass movie. You know, they distributed Fitzcarraldo. I mean, I remember seeing that as a fucking kid and being like, "Yo, what the fuck is this about?"
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. He distributed Federico Fredellini movies. He was the one who brought the Seventh Seal into cinemas in the '70s. You know, the Ingmar Bergman. You know,
Wow.
actually the only time Corman was ever really associated with the Academy Awards is when these foreign films would get nominated for Best Foreign Film. The only
Wow.
reason they were is because Roger Corman brought those in and brought those into LA movie theaters. Federico Fellini actually said that the only time his movies ever made money was through Roger Corman. Yeah, you know, and they would, and you know, Corman didn't care. He would send it to drive-ins. You know, so they're drive-in movie theaters in the '70s that had, you know, aim accord, you know, all these kind of odd movies. But you know, and truth be said, Roger Corman, you know, looked at, you know, aim accord and he's like, well, there's nudity in this. Send it to the drive-in, and people loved it. You know, so.
So, for us that grew up, you know, at the maybe somewhere between the New World and the Concord New Horizons era of Corman, we sort of aged out of this type of movie, but we weren't alone because the world sort of aged out. And I want to talk a little bit about this. It's sort of the end of the late night cable movie where you could just have blood and martial arts or boobs and explosions and guaranteed ratings. Like that sort of ended when the internet kind of became a thing, and all of a sudden that was not a draw for anyone, I don't think, or at least not the the way it was a draw for us.
Have you guys
Wouldn't
seen
you say that was
Space
kind of
Jack?
early-ish 90s? That
I
started
would no,
really
oh no,
fading?
I would say that's late 90s for sure. Like I'd say like almost 99, 2000, maybe even early 2000s, where that just really like
yeah, Roger Corman.
Because I'm also kind of equating it to Canon Films, which also seemed like they started to kind of fall off in the early part of the 90s. You know what I mean? They did the Stallone films,
Canon,
we did He-Man, and then it just kind of
Canon was like spiraling from like 1987 onward, I would say. I don't know, maybe if not earlier, maybe 86 even.
Yeah, He-Man and Superman were like the death of it, and then
part of that is Corman never liked the home video market, because he never made profits on it the way he did if he did like a TV movie or sold movie to cables. Like for a lot of years he did Sci-Fi Channel. You know, he made more money off of the selling of his movies to the cable networks than he did actually on the video sales. And so that was kind of part of his plan, was he never really got into that home video market. Whereas I think people like Canon and certain other companies, you know, definitely bought into the home video market a little bit more. I
can't remember what the name of that. There's one guy in the 80s that was kind of like king of really the VHS, and I can't think of his name.
Charles Band.
Yes.
Full Moon. Yeah.
Full Moon Features.
Full Moon's whole strategy, Charles Band's whole strategy was home video. You know, and
rental, the rental market was
they
crushed, dude. Puppet Master, those things crushed the rental market.
Well, I was just gonna say, wouldn't I think about? I mean, to me anyway, when I think back, like the 80s was kind of a peak decade for horror films. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, and you got such a range of like super low B movies. Plus, you were getting your Friday the 13th, your Freddy's, and you know, for a good part of the 80s, Michael Myers was dormant, but the low budget stuff was just off the charts in the 80s, and a lot of that was due to home video, because it was just like shoot it, throw a cool cover on the VHS box, and send it out. You know what I mean? And it would make bank.
And I think it was Corman. If I don't know if Sam Markoff may have been doing this before Corman, but they used to pay someone to make the posters before they would even have a
100%. Yeah,
they do titles.
They would sell.
Yeah,
Friday the 13th was literally sold based just on the name of the movie. You know, and it was literally there wasn't even a cool poster. It just said Friday the 13th, scariest movie ever made, and then they they sold it and built out from there. It's like, okay, now
Yeah.
we've got the money. What are we going to do?
Yeah,
I love, yeah, when people can write that kind of shit on the cover
I didn't
page
notice.
or
I
even
didn't
in the
notice.
script anywhere.
I
Yeah.
love that way of filmmaking. It's not what's on the typewriter, what's on the poster. You know.
No, well, that's
Yeah.
well. I just realized this after reading Gray's book. Corman used to send people down to local high schools and ask students what titles they liked. Yeah, so he literally had like a list of like 20 titles, and they'd sit down and ask, freshmen in a high school study hall, do you like, Smokey and the Criminal? Do you like, the Razor's Edge, strippers? Do you like, like he would name all of these movies, and they would judge based on that what movie to write. But if I could just for 1 second here, just to give you the sheer volume that this man did, just from 1980 on, these are the movies this man produced: Battle Beyond the Stars, Galaxy of Terror, Smokey Bites the Dust, Forbidden World, Suburbia with Penelope Spheres, Chris.
Punk rock one, yeah.
Amazons, Sweet Revenge, Slumber Party 2, Slumber Party 3, The Mask of the Red Death, Terror Within, Slumber Party 4, Killer Instinct, Munchie, Carnosaur, Angel of Destruction, Fantastic Four, the famous Roger.
Oh, yes, that one is. I'll tell you what. It's the exact same movie that Fox made, just on a Corman budget. It's fascinating to watch as a comparative.
It actually is. Yeah.
An amazing documentary. I mean, like, that's just the 80s movies he produced, not the ones he executive produced, not the ones that his wife produced or the others in the company produced, and he just wrote, signed the checks. I mean,
wait, but you didn't mention Humanoids from the Deep. Wasn't that a Corman joint too?
Actually, no, that was
that like
was
Making Contact
was
and The Prince of Pennsylvania. Like you're dropping some hits here.
Well, sorry. I mean, I was just reading.
I was just
reading off your
Humanoids
favorite
from the Deep was one that.
Well, I was
still
reading.
Gets talked about.
I mean, Deathstalker, Eat My Dust. Like Attack of the Giant Leeches. I mean, the list goes on and on. But we have to mention the Edgar Allan Poe movies. I mean,
I forgot about those.
Roger Corman did the smartest thing he ever did was, after making these small little black and white movies, and again, what he would do is he'd make, he'd get an advance on the, on the movie for the next movie. He'd make these movies for, he'd get $75,000, for instance, to make Ski Troop Attack. Well, he'd say he was going to make the movie for $75,000. He made the movie for $46,000, pocketed the rest of the money. And, and then, got an advance to do 2 more. Well, he finally had it, and he said, why don't you give me all this money for one movie? Give me $150,000. Let me hire a real actor and let me film it in color. And I guarantee you will be successful. And what comes out of that is Vincent Price starring in The House of Usher. And all of a sudden there's these 8 classic Edgar Allan Poe adaptations that you can watch Atlas, or you can watch Machine Gun Kelly, and it's like, okay, this is not really a great film. But you watch something like, The Tomb of Elijah, with Vincent Price, or Premature Burial with Ray Milland, or, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, the only movie he ever made for a studio, at Fox. I mean, Roger Corman was a very talented man, and he did some amazing, beautiful work that will last. I mean, they still show his Edgar Allan Poe movies in high school, when people are reading these Edgar Allan Poe stories.
Someone in the chat mentioned the cameos, and like, it is just shockingly impressive. My favorite Corman cameo in a non-Corman movie is probably Philadelphia, because it's like the most prestige. I can't think of a movie that's more prestigious than that, but he probably, I mean, Godfather 2, he's in that, so yeah, I guess that, that counts.
Well, he was in Silence of the Lambs. Got a lot of his stuff got cut out.
I just
Right,
watched
yeah.
Silence of the Lambs not that long ago, and I had to double take it because the last time I'd seen it, it just went right past me. I'm like, oh shit, that's Roger Corman,
Yeah.
you know. But
I think my favorite
it's
cameo is in The Howling, where Joe Dante, who Joe Dante started off as a trailers editor for Roger Corman, uh, has Roger Corman come into a phone booth and actually check the change slot before he makes a phone call, and did that absolutely on purpose. So,
Great.
I found it was interesting that Roger Corman's first movie was a movie called The Intruder with William Shatner, and it was a serious movie of
the
segregation,
only movie he never made money on.
and it flopped. And after that,
Yeah.
he said, "You know what? I'm gonna make my social commentary, less obvious, and so I'm gonna bury it in weird shit."
Well, have you guys seen The Intruder?
No.
That movie,
Okay.
that's one of those movies that, I mean, it shocked me they made it then, but there's no way that you could have made it now. And basically what it is, it's about William Shatner plays basically a a local guy who his job is he gets paid to come in and kind of rev up the crowds, and kind of cause some issues. And his whole point is he comes into this town to basically make race, to go against black people and to get the city to really kind of turn against this crowd and keep it going. And at the very end, he of course he fails and he's killed by the people that he's trying to rebel rouse. And it really is, it was a social commentary on that these are real people. Like Corman wanted to expose that there are people who get paid to do this. Um, and I remember during the pandemic when we kind of had the riots were going on a little bit, uh, during a lot of that, uh, the intruder people started watching that movie again, and it started to trend a little bit because there's scenes in there's pictures and images on TikTok of people saying, look, there was a protest I can't remember what town it was. My brain wants to say Ferguson, but I know that that's not what it was. But at one of the towns there was this random pile of bricks that all of a sudden showed up out of nowhere, and these are where people are supposed to be protesting, and all of a sudden people just magically happen to drop off these bricks, and gee, why are these here? To incite a riot and you realize there are people out there that do that. And so it was a very brave film. And he says in his book, it made money. Because over the years and video rentals and the fact that Shatner, people started to rent it on video, it finally made its money back by like 1988. So he technically never lost money off of it. But
And it's interesting. I feel like the mainstream studios will have their accountants be so creative. They'll say like, "Oh, we haven't made any money yet on Men in Black. We just haven't made. That's why we keep making more of them. We haven't made our money back yet. We lost money on each one. So, and it's just a way to not pay the actors their royalties, their back end, and all these other people their back end and stuff, royalties. But
well,
I feel like Roger
I'll tell you
Corman had the opposite thing.
When I do a play production, I will automatically cut off $200 right off the top, just so I know no matter what, I'm always going to be under budget. And I really, truthfully, I learned that from Roger Corman, like reading his books and studying what he did. I said to myself, I never want to go over budget on anything. There's no reason.
You do realize that the $200 that he was talking about is inflated to like more than 200 now, right?
I've still never gone over budget, Chris.
That's all right. Well, who am I to argue? Who am I to argue?
But those ideas and what I mean, I remember being on the set of my films, and I remember in his book he said one of the things never to do on the set of a movie, don't have bottles of water. because no matter what, it'll always go to waste. But what happens on a set of a movie, people will grab a bottle of water. They'll open it up, they'll take a drink, they'll set it down. Then they'll go do their thing and run around. Well, they can't find where their water bottle is. So now they'll open up another one. And by the end of the shooting day, you look around, you got 15, 17 wasted bottles of water. So what did Corman do? He gets plastic cups and jugs of water. If you really want a water, you'll pour it. And then if you leave a styrofoam cup, well, whatever. We're only throwing.
Yeah, it's a Dixie cup. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean so every time I do a movie, I never have bottles of water. I just get jugs of water.
Oh, you must be so popular with your crew. And your
I mean, you want to treat your crew with respect. You want to treat your crew with dignity. You want to make sure that they're happy. And I'll be honest, Roger Corman, no matter what, he always paid union wages. He was never working for unions. His movies were never union jobs, but he would pay union wages. And he would pay people's, insurances, and he would pay all that stuff. Like, he always wanted to make sure it was done the right way. It's just, for Galaxy of Terror, the ship had McDonald's cartons on it. And you never noticed it. I mean, really, truthfully, if you really go through Galaxy of Terror, which is a great horror movie, if you haven't seen it, one of the first pre-Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund films.
Aaron Moran, aka Joni from Happy Days.
Yeah. And it was Jim Cameron, Titanic James Cameron. He's the one who put the McDonald's cups on the styrofoam.
Yeah, they were to-go containers that were painted red, and that's how they did all the hallways. And and when you know that's what it is very obvious, but you wouldn't if somebody didn't tell you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But as soon as you know that, you look, you're like, oh wow, that's really creative and pretty smart, And then I think it was Cameron who did the design of the ship from Battle Beyond the Stars. And that's funny because I can't remember what the other movie was, but Corman used all the footage and special effects from Battle Beyond the Stars for a completely different movie. And I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but all the ships, all the space fighting, all that stuff was just lifted right from one movie to the other one.
Oh, yeah, he used to do that for years. Oh, he would do that for years.
Was it Battlestar Galactica? Was it? He might have somebody licensed footage from Battlestar Galactica, the original,
That's
and
Space
put it
Mutiny.
and stuff.
That's
is that what I'm thinking of? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I knew I'm with the right people to crack this.
Yeah, but Corman would do. I mean, but he would do that. He one of the famous ones is Peter Bogdanovich's first movie, Targets, where he had left over from the Raven. He owed Boris Karloff owed him 2 days, and so what he said to Peter Bogdanovich is he said, film Boris Karloff for 2 days, take footage from The Terror, about 30 minutes of The Terror, which is an awful movie, and you have 5 days to film the rest of the movie. Those are the parameters. Go out and make whatever. And what does he do? He creates Targets and gets a career out of it. Goes on to do Last Picture Show. So, I mean, he was creative, but that all happened just because he was a cheapskate and owed 2 days of Boris Karloff. I think Lee's here. Lee Keeler, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi.
Lee Keeler is here,
Welcome.
a fellow film school friend of mine.
Wow.
Who is also a Corman enthusiast. And
I don't live in my car yet, but I have a friend who's in town in LA, and so he's in the restaurant right now, and I'm stepped outside to join y'all. So hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. Could you put your phone into widescreen mode? Would that be possible?
Yeah, let me see. I've never done this, and I am an analog person, so I'm slowly turning in.
Living in a digital world. There we go.
Hey, there.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. We've all been sharing our Roger Corman stories here. What was your gateway drug into the Corman world, Lee?
Oh, shit, I don't know. Well, that's a tough question. Probably Death Race. I got to see that in a place called Studio 35 in Columbus, Ohio. And
wow.
that's
Awesome.
you can still smoke inside of a theater. And so the first time I saw any proper, Corman-y stuff was seeing Death Race, and it was super fun. Studio 35, the old version of that, had a back bar. It's funny that a lot of draft house theaters try to emulate this model now, but it had a bar in the back and you could smoke back there, and they had a fish tank and all this shit. And I remember just watching Death Race through the glass and sitting in the back, and that's when I could still smoke. So it was that. And then I teach some film stuff for a couple of small colleges now, and I try to tell my students in terms of just like the low budget stuff in terms of the Corman model. Just try to extol the virtues of the research that Ian has talked about in terms of his books and the guy's work before. So
I love that.
yeah.
So
Is that the least exciting? I mean, look, but that's indirect Corman. I think that in terms of like super indirect Corman, the most influential thing for me was seeing Joe Dante's work with Gremlins when I was a kid. Like I would go to Hardee's and because I'm from the Midwest, and get the like little Gremlins like 7-inch story records books, and
It's beautiful.
that's probably my genuine entree. But
that's American culture at its finest right there.
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah, I absolutely love that.
But isn't it fascinating, Lee, just going off of, we've been in film school, and
yeah.
it shocks me how much they don't teach Roger Corman's approaches, and they don't want to acknowledge that these are going to be probably the first films that you'll work on, and all this stuff.
Well, they were our direct professors were high rollers. That's why.
Yeah.
And that they they look down on that guy, or they look down on people who did straight to video or medium model. These were marquee people that, out of respectfully, that who taught us. And so
there should be mandatory.
Sorry. Yeah, it should be mandatory. You have to learn the Corman model and learn Robert Rodriguez model. Like you'd think so. And especially in terms of long term, in terms of surviving and being realistic about your audience and your chances. I like him because he, every 5 to 10 years, would just either create a new company or change the name of his company and take new approaches.
Yep.
And was in constant assessment of what worked and what didn't. And it didn't always work, but it usually paid off to where he was able to stay in business and stay profitable. And yeah, so it's insane that it is not taught. And have we talked about women with Roger Corman yet at all on this episode?
Perfect time to start. Yeah, no, perfect time to start.
Go for it. Yeah.
I think like it was insane to me that we would see all these lists of people that he launched, and I didn't really see Gail Ann Hurd's name on there anywhere.
We did talk about her,
and
earlier.
He is. Well, I'll shut up then.
No.
It's just insane that he helped launch, because I'm of two minds about it. He helped launch the career of Gail Ann Hurd and other women that worked in his company or in his companies. But at the same time, he was a maestro of titty films. And so on the one hand, he pushed behind the camera stuff forward, and on the other hand, in terms of content, he kept us in a Cro-Magnon state and made it harder to genuine female stories.
If anyone out there is interested, there's some chat. I'll get to this in a sec. I see Tracy Lee Statoni, or Staten. I don't know, this is spelled two different ways at two different points in the chat. But she says they only spent $15K making my movie. It's so true about the cost of supplying bottled water. Also said they do not teach the Corman way at film school, nor Lloyd Kaufman's. I didn't need film school to make a cheap movie. That's an interesting point there as well. That the people that, yeah, don't have money for film school don't, that's a very interesting point there. But for those of you who are interested on seeing more of the underbelly or the darker side of Corman's, his work's relationship to women, there was a documentary made in the mid 90s, the late 90s actually, called Some Nudity Required, by a woman named Odette Springer, who used to be a music supervisor for Roger Corman. And I could see you nodding your head already. It's a pretty, I'm impressed that you're even aware of this. It took me like years to track it down, but I finally did. And it's just a completely eye-opening documentary. It's basically a Me Too documentary before Me Too, like 20 years before Me Too was a thing. And the story with this documentary itself is heartbreaking, but you have a lot of actresses from and directors as well, from that era. Jim Wynorski's in it. Roger Corman's in it, of course. Julia Strain is in it. Maria Ford is in it. Brink Stevens is in it. So like all the big Corman hitters are in this documentary. And it really exposes how women were exploited in these movies, even, and again, this is like 1990, mid 90s while it's being made. It comes out in 1998. Documentary wins Sundance. And Roger Corman didn't care about this documentary blowing the lid on him until it won Sundance. And the word filtered back to him about it, and specifically one element of it that he took the most umbrage with, which is crazy. But she basically kind of called him out for this thing that he had spray painted the carpets black in his screening room. Instead of just getting black carpets, which are more expensive, he just got a can of spray paint and he spray painted the carpets black. And apparently everyone that, was in that theater for screening, they would walk out and they'd have black shit all over their soles of their shoes because, that's not like how carpets are made or whatever. But he got so pissed, apparently, he used all his power and he squashed this documentary. So this documentary wins Sundance, and then it can't get a release because a home video, you know what I mean? A home video store carries it, or a retail store carries it. You're not getting my movies. If a cable channel airs it, you're not getting my movies. And his movies were worth a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
It was the whole B side of entertainment and multimedia. And I'm not, I hate I'm not like here to bash the man or anything like that.
No.
But it is an interesting.
Thank you for, because I just think that like there's a lot of complexities to anybody's legacy. I think he's kind of like Stan Lee that way, or like Stan Lee, like I don't know, like he wasn't as loudmouth as Stan Lee. Like I guess if you added Tarantino, if you Brundleflied Tarantino into Roger Corman, you would have Stan Lee. Because
so I do. Oh, I'm
Quentin
sorry.
was marginally talented.
So I do just want
and
to
is a thief. But
yeah, right. The ultimate thief of Corman is probably Tarantino. I do just want to respond to in the chat. I see Tracy Lee Staton says, "Where can we catch this Corman documentary?" So again, the documentary is called Some Nudity Required. It is available on Vimeo. I'm not sure if it's a purchase behind a paywall or if it's free, but it really is. If it's behind a paywall, it's worth it. If you really want to see this, it's not all about Corman. It's about the whole industry of B movies in general. It's not like a Corman assassination job, but it's, the film Getting Killed was Corman's assassination job himself. So it's an interesting dichotomy, but it's a heartbreaking film and it's really good stuff. And it's interesting to see the fallout, not just for the film and the filmmaker, the great Odette Springer, but for Maria Ford as well. Maria Ford got blacklisted for doing this movie and for speaking out about the way she was exploited. And she literally had to get plastic surgery, completely change her appearance, and use a different name and pretend to be from a different country when she auditioned for movies for years. So she just completely looks unrecognizable and says she's like this woman from like South America or something. And it's, it's a shame what happened to some people. And of course, Jim Wynorski and Julie Strain, they didn't get canceled because they spoke glowingly of the industry in this documentary, because it's a fair and balanced documentary. It's not just, again, let's get everyone that has dirt, you know. Let's get everyone's honest opinion, which is what a documentary should be.
Well, which honestly leads to the question that I do wonder: can there be another Roger Corman?
Good question.
In within this industry of being more awake on how we treat women, how we treat genre, how we treat how being more aware, and just the access, the streaming wars, and the where you promote your stuff. I mean, can there be somebody who kind of rises to the top that brings that kind of quality work anymore? And
I think that the table has never been more set for like another Corman kind of era. You know, we get shoveled all these studio movies down our throat, and it's like, if it's not a superhero thing, we don't go out and see it. They don't make anything new. It's just remake, reboot, sequel series, prequel in between.
Build a universe. It's all shared universe type stuff. And that's, we've talked about that before with even trying to kind of play around with some of my ideas where it's like there's just springboard talking about one movie off of something currently in theaters, but the problem is stuff in theaters is not, it's a sequel or it's a reboot or it's a franchise thing. I mean, it's been boiled down, and I think about like in the 90s you kind of had Tarantino and Kevin Smith kind of blew up that independent film thing where if you had any kind of a small script that Miramax would come in and buy it and make your movie, you know what I mean? And I think that after that boom died, it really kind of became, you think about the 2000s, everything after that started to move into that era we live in now, where it's just remakes or franchises or sequels to really old movies. You know what I mean? It's like, let's try to revive this and, bring Ghostbusters back or, reboot Star Wars again, whatever.
Well, let's reboot Death Race.
Yeah.
Well, at least Corman did his own sequel to that years later. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you're right, because that's right. Jason Statham, that was a whole other thing, wasn't it?
Like,
well, even the Fast and the Furious franchise, they bought the rights from an old Roger Corman movie.
Yeah.
Wow.
What the interesting thing to me, that whole situation is the fact that he can make these movies at a certain amount of money. They come back, they make enough money to make another one. It'll make it cheaper, than the first movie. Make even more money, and then it peters out a little bit. And it is weird, like around like Sharknado, it was like almost this resurgent where people forgot like the 80s was full of shitty movies like this, and they're like, oh, look how the oddity of Sharknado was why I like to watch it. All of a sudden this sort of vibe kind of popped back up, and then Tubi is now just full of like homages to Roger Corman and
God bless
Joe Estevez and overweight Baldwin brother and
oh, I love that.
Steve Gutenberg and Lava Lantula, like I'll watch those, Buds and Suds movies. I think they always have a place there, and especially on Tubi now. And I just, that whole genre is just, has a special place, I think, in all our arts,
And I agree. Kind of going down that hole of doing low budget films where it's like you just, I'm trying to remember if it was Tusk or around that, where we had seen him talk about it at a panel where it was like, okay, instead of trying to make these bigger movies over and over, it's like you can make a bunch of small movies for a small amount of money. And if they make their money back, that's great. If they make a little profit, that's great. But you're not on the line to do these real huge things. But I don't know that Kevin Smith's put out a lot of movies or anything in a long time anyway, really. Now I'm trying to think of what, maybe Clerks 3 was maybe one of his last ones, or
yeah.
That's where going back to what you asked earlier, like if we're going to get another Roger Corman, I think we are, but I don't think we're going to in film. I think that was a finite point in time in terms of that industry. I think that you will get some kind of Roger Corman probably in the gaming industry. I think we're probably going to have somebody who knows how to make mid-level games for cheap, probably with teams that are affordable in Russia or the Middle East, and then knows how to flip that into profit. In terms of this media form, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, it's over. But like we've been sitting here talking about echoes and sequels of something that's and throwbacks of something that's already been done. I think in terms of he did have a cultural contribution, but in terms of his economic model, I just don't see it happening in film again. I think the film is a different industry now and completely whole cloth than when he entered it. And so I think that the gaming industry still has a lot of money and a lot of rough territory. Where if there is somebody who's
I feel like I totally agree with what you're saying, like in some ways, and then like I totally like my perspective is limited here, so I totally just might have the wrong take in the ways that I don't agree. But like I have some friends who do video game design and just like so what you're saying about if someone figures out how to do it for cheap, that is just so much money right there because it is so crazy expensive. But I think the interesting thing about now, I think the barrier to filmmaking is lower. I think like people literally, you know, there's a film that was shot on an iPhone that won Sundance. So like I feel like it's never been technically more achievable.
Yeah.
It's just a question of whether or not you can get the culture to digest it, you know? I think that's the biggest barrier for a Corman style of film brand right now.
Have movies that I mean, you get a lot of Sci-Fi Channel, you get a lot of Shudder, you know what I mean? Like a lot of people getting these smaller budget opportunities to do it. What was the one Interview with the Devil, or was it Late Night with the Devil that just came out?
Late Night with the
Devil. So, but I also wonder if horror wouldn't be where you would put your focus on that, because it always seems like horror is a place where you can make a pretty cool movie for not a lot of money. You know what I mean?
Well, it's funny you
I
say
would
that.
say arguably most recent. Go ahead, Dean.
Well, I was just gonna say, you know, it is a brand. I mean, you know, what's funny about Roger Corman's brand is when he was, you know, when he's releasing, you know, Oklahoma Woman and Apache Woman and, you know, Five Guns West and all these, there was no Roger Corman brand. You know, it was only after, you know, and so these kids eating up this medium didn't know that they were watching this brand until years later it becomes a brand. And so yeah, it's always interesting to me how over time it becomes. You know, we know Roger Corman now because of what we've seen and the body, the library that he developed over time. But you know, in those earlier years,
yeah.
Well, you know, it always is.
That's where it may be impossible to spot who the next one's going to be. Yeah. And that's part of why I wanted to bring up is that like your gaming and digital stuff is that things move so quickly now that careers they rise and fall in a capacity that is faster than in Corman's time and even Kevin Smith's heyday. Like careers are made and lost in 3-4 years now. And so it's just hard to say, especially in terms of long view, like who the next Corman is going to be, who's going to be that consistent slow horse in the race.
Yeah.
Well, hard. Just the way my mashup brain works, you mentioned Corman and then, you know, you mentioned video games. And it sort of makes me just wonder what the ultimate Corman movie to adapt into a video game would have been. Like for me, maybe Skateboard Kid, Godzilla 1984, though. There's a lot of New World making contact.
2000 already made it essentially in the form of Carmageddon, which they've said was influenced by that movie. So
and like Twisted Metal too, I'm sure was influenced by that as well.
Anything car combat in that regard.
True.
I refuse to do nothing until there's a video game of Eat My Dust.
Well, there is love. There is love in the chat. Tracy Lee Staten says this Death Race 2000 is love, and Caitlin Altman says she saw Lavalantula for Leslie Easterbrook, of course. So gotta love Leslie Easterbrook. Gotta love movies like Lavalantula. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time. But before we wrap it up, is there anything you guys have got going on you want to let the home audience know about? Any articles or appearances or happenings over on channels or anything like
Well, there's one, Chris. There is one thing I can say. Just before we end the Roger Corman tribute, years ago, right about the time I was actually graduating film school, I actually had an opportunity to possibly do an internship at Roger Corman's studio. And literally it was sitting down while I was reading his book. I just happened to call up the company one day, New Horizons, and I ended up talking to Frances Dole, who was his script editor for many years. Wonderful woman. And unfortunately, they ended up giving the internship to somebody else like 5 days before I was going to move out to LA. They gave it to a high school kid or something. My one regret I always had is I never got a chance to actually work for the company. But during the pandemic, Roger Corman did this competition where he basically wanted to see at home, could you make a film? And it was called the Corman Challenge. And I ended up getting a bunch of my friends together, from LA and Iowa and all this stuff. We all filmed in our houses and we made this short little movie. And I knew I was going to get emotional a little bit about this. I know that Roger Corman watched my film. And I am so grateful that this man gave opportunities. And so I just really want to, publicly thank Roger Corman.
You're tugging away at my heartstrings so much. You're gonna make me cry under my big stupid aviators.
Yeah, so. The guy did some really terrible movies, and the guy did some amazing movies. And as I posted the other day, as long as there's still a VHS tape of him out there, the legacy lives on.
Oh
yeah. Well,
I can't.
Here.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can't think of a better note to end on. Other than us all just waiting for Brad Pitt to play Roger Corman in the inevitable biopic that is to come and win Oscars. He'll finally get all his Oscars.
And then it'll win 9 Oscars. Yeah.
I love it. Great. Well, supposedly Joe Dante is doing a version of his time making the trip. Supposedly that's on the horizons, and they did announce a couple months ago they were going to redo Little Shop of Horrors. So I mean, the guy at 98 was still producing and making stuff. So he never quit. You got to give him credit for that. So
wow. Well, before we say goodnight, I do want to say that you Fandom fans might want to come back tomorrow at 9 p.m. when the VCR returns to its regularly scheduled programming, and we turn Ian into the man in motion for our St. Elmo's Fire episode. As always, if you enjoyed this video, the best way to help is to smash that like button and leave a comment telling us what movie or TV franchise that you want us to cover on a future episode of VCR Redux. And since you're already doing that, you might as well go ahead and like, subscribe, and follow Fandom Spotlight, Retro Fiend Radio, and Pop Culture Punk. Till then, back up those Betamax, rewind those Laserdiscs, and we'll see you at the movies.